Welcome to today's webinar session from ImagineIt and Advanced Solutions. Today's topic will be Journey to Space in AutoCAD. Thank you for joining us. This session will run tentatively until 1 p.m. Short agenda, we will review introductions of the content. We will talk about this month's topic and its learning objectives, doing a brief demonstration and presentation portion, looking at upcoming webinar options, and as we have time at the end, we'll take questions and answers. And again, thank you for joining us. My name is Jason Smith. I'm a pilot instructor and education specialist. I have been with the company since 2016, and I am based out of the Cincinnati, Ohio area. I've worked in the architectural industry for over 20 years, mainly on commercial projects, and I've used Autodesk products for all of that time. I am also professionally Revit certified in Autodesk products for Revit, AutoCAD, and Autodesk Instruction, using a number of Autodesk products throughout the lifetime of my career. Today's webinar session, again, is called Journey to Space in AutoCAD. In this session, we will be reviewing and exploring the differences between paper space and model space in AutoCAD and know how to utilize those spaces while keeping them separate and informative, working effectively in the paper space and model space areas, learning how to control different elements such as line weights, annotation scales, and being successful in that process, including setting up paper space and model space correctly and adjusting line type scales independently of each of those areas to ensure that the drawing will appropriately appear and print correctly. And of course, we'll be using AutoCAD for today's software. Some learning objectives that we'll be covering. We will learn to properly draft in model space and paper space independently, utilize paper space when setting up different sheets for printing, use of different line type scales for correct spacing and sizing, recognize the differences between the two spaces of model space and paper space. We'll go ahead and jump into the demonstration portion of today's class with a presentation as well. The first thing we'll talk about is annotative scaling. If you're not familiar, in AutoCAD there is a function for annotation which includes dimensions, text in the form of single and multi-line text, multi-leaders, hatches, and blocking or blocks that have the ability to modify their scale factor and how they're presented in your viewport based on the scale factor of those viewports in your paper space area. That allows you to draft one single type of content, and based on the scale factor of your viewports, the content will change its size relatively automatically, with a few caveats there that we'll look at. And you can adjust a number of different functions within those tools to modify how those elements look. When you are in a paper space area for AutoCAD, you can select a viewport by selecting the viewport itself and look at the properties of that viewport. You can control whether that viewport's content is turned on, whether any of the viewport area is clipped, yes or no, whether the viewport display is locked, yes or no. That means whether the viewport display is adjustable by its scale factor. If you lock it, that means it cannot accidentally change its scale factor. So typically, once you set the scale factor accurately, you will want to lock that display so that it does not accidentally adjust its scale factor later, once you get it correct. You can adjust the annotation scale, which means what you want your annotation to look like as a scale factor or size, and you can have that separate from the scale factor itself of the viewport. You can also adjust with a custom scale factor if you want to type that in. You also have similar options in the view status bar, where the scale factors are located, with a flyout window and a list of standard scale factors that you can choose from, and that will allow you to adjust any of the viewports that you are currently selected into. Now let's switch to AutoCAD and start looking at how this content functions, especially in the form of text. So again, in model space, this is a separate environment where I can draft any content I want to. Typically, the model space background is black and the paper space background is white. That is one major way to differentiate between the two areas. And currently I have two elements of text here. One is set to a style of standard, and the other one is set to an annotative text style. That means that the annotative text option is turned on. You can also see that in the properties where the style is called annotative, and annotative is equal to yes. The standard style, annotative is equal to no. What annotative does, again, is it allows the annotation objects to adjust their size based on the scale factor of the viewport that they're placed in, allowing all of the text and annotation to display accurately to relatively the same size in relation to the printed sheet that the viewports are on. So you can have multiple different viewports on a sheet with different scale factors, and all of the text will show up in the same size graphically on your printed object. So that's going to help make all of your content legible when printing without the ability or without the requirement to adjust the sizes manually or create copies of text and turn that text on and off in different viewports, which before annotative text was included in AutoCAD was how a practice creating different viewports with text functioned. So I currently have two pieces of text here, annotative and standard, with a rectangle around each one of them to show their relative size currently in a 1-to-1 scale factor in model space. I can switch to the layout paper space by going down to the lower left corner of my screen where it says layout 1. Click that area, and now I'm in paper space. Paper space is also called layout space or printed space, things like that. You might hear them referred to as different terms. Basically, it just means this is the area that you typically will print content from and create your sheets. I have 4 different viewports that are equally sized, and the same annotative and standard text is zoomed to extents in each viewport. I can click into one viewport and each one separately. I can zoom in and out of each viewport by zooming in and out. I can also select the standard scale factor in the view control bar down at the bottom here with a flyout window, and all standard scales are listed. I have some text here that says this scale factor should be 1 foot equals a foot, so I'm going to change it to that. And you can see the text does not update its size in any way. Click down to the 6 inch equals a foot option and change that one. You can see immediately that the annotative text increased its size relative to the standard text size. But if you look at the relative size between both of these viewports, the annotative text is relatively the same size in both viewports, even though they're different scale factors. I'll switch to the 3 inch equals a foot viewport and do the same modification. 3 inch equals a foot. And again, the annotative text size is appropriate to the other viewports, and the standard text size keeps getting smaller and is not changing automatically. Again, unless the annotative option is turned on in the text or other annotative objects, it will not automatically adjust its size. You would have to do that manually. Last one, 1/2 inch equals a foot. Change the scale factor of that option. And that text size modifies itself as well. So each of these viewports will be legible in different scale factors for the annotation that you place in them. Again, that requires that the text is set to become annotative. You can also modify different aspects of the text, such as what you want the annotation scale to be, what you want the size of the text to be on the paper space area. So right now it's set to 0.2. If I change that to say 0.1, it will adjust each of the viewports to decrease the size of that text. If I double the size of what it was before, I believe that was 0.4. Oops, sorry, not with factor. paper space text height to 0.4, it increases the text height of each viewport independently. So you have complete control over the text and the global settings that will affect each viewport, especially if the same text is visible in each view. Typically, though, you do not display this exact same text in each view, so you will not see this same annotative piece of text in multiple viewports, because usually you'll be focusing on different areas or aspects of your model in different viewports, and the same exact piece of text is usually not displayed in multiple areas, but it certainly can be, and AutoCAD can handle that and make sure that you review what the viewports look like before printing so that you know that everything looks accurate, especially because once you change the text size, it changes the size relative to the area of the model, and it may overlap the text on content that is not intended because you cannot see that in model space. So a lot of people work on content through a viewport so they can see where all the annotation is going to exist in the final printed product. Again, as I mentioned before, when you are modifying annotative objects, you can modify their annotative scaling by adjusting the properties of the object, selecting its object and looking at the properties, modifying its paper text height and its annotative scale factor, and making sure that annotative option is set to yes. Other things that we can look at are line types and hatching. Look at those different options as well and how they are affected by paper space and scaling. So if I look at this drawing here, it has a number of line types in it of different sizes. Dashed line type, batting line type, center line type, gas line type, a dash dot, and a Phantom 2 line style. So each one of those have different colors and different line types. But also, line types will adjust in viewports by their scale factor. So if I go to a paper space now, I have 4 equally spaced viewports, and I can change the scale factor to each of the identified scale factors listed below. So I can change this to 1 foot equals a foot. It's basically a 1-to-1 scale again. Change the 6 inch equals a foot. That gets a little bit larger. You can see the term gas here. Change the 3 inch equals a foot. Now I can hear you speaking. I know that you're saying that the line types are not changing their scale factor. And they will once you hit regenerate, which is kind of annoying. You can double click inside of a viewport and type regen to regenerate that single viewport. It unfortunately does not update all of the viewports manually. You can also use a tool called regen all, and it will regenerate all of the viewports at the same time. It does not do that automatically. I wish it did. That's kind of annoying that you have to type regenerate in when text does that perfectly, but that is a requirement that you have to type in that regen or regen all option when changing the scale factor and being able to see all of the modifications of line weights or line types especially. Additionally, if I go to a printed view, actually, let's see if I can undo some of those changes. I'll set those back to zoom extents. Regen all, and it's set everything back to the original style. I'll set all the scale factors again. And if you accidentally forget to regenerate before printing, the print process actually does a regeneration for you before printing. So that's okay if you forget to regenerate. The printing of a document will automatically regenerate your document for you. So if I click the print dialog box and do a preview, even before setting the scale factor to regenerate, it regenerates all of these viewports automatically. So you can see that the batting and gas and other line types are the same relative offset for each of the line work elements based regardless of the scale factor. So it will update when you print, so you don't need to be concerned of it accidentally printing incorrectly if you forget to regenerate. Another option is blocks. So if I create a line type, for instance, and I turn that into a block, go to model space here, create two pieces of line work here with some line information of different line types. Fence line, sure. So if I zoom in, I can see that each one of those are different. Let me change their color to differentiate them even more. And I'll use Control-Shift-X. Odd, why didn't that delete? Oh, Control-X, sorry about that. To cut that element from my view, and then I'm going to use Control-Shift-V to paste those two lines as a block. That's a AutoCAD shortcut. Control-Shift-V will paste anything as a block in your view. So now these two pieces of line work are turned into a block. If I go to my layout space again, and I look at the line weight information, I can see that the block line weights are also modified for the different scale factors. Pan around so we can see those more clearly. And regenerate all just to make sure. And you can see that the circle of the fencing line is exactly the same proportion in each scale factor of the viewports. So even if a line type is in a block, it will still update its scale factor via each viewport's scaling. The next thing we'll look at is hatching. Hatches will also adjust based on the scale factor of the view. So if I go to this AutoCAD file that has a number of different rectangles with different hatching inside of them, you can also manually set the size of the hatch as you're creating it. So this hatch is set to 1 scale. This hatch is set to 1 scale. This hatch is set to 0.125. And this hatch is set to 0.25. So you can change the scale factor of how you want the hatch to look typically, but the scale factor of each viewport will make that scale factor adjust relative to how it should look in model space compared to paper space. So let me adjust my viewports, each one. Six inch equals a foot. And you can kind of see already that all of the hatches are relatively the same size in each viewport, regardless of the scale factor. Especially you can tell that on the top left corner here where the rectangles for the boxes are smaller, meaning the hatch is not taking up as much space as the other viewports, but the diamond shape is exactly the same size in each viewport area. So regardless of the scale factor, the hatching will still take up the same scale factor size. And again, that also works with other annotations such as multi-leaders and dimensions. Same thing as text, they also have the ability to turn on an annotative option. So here's a question. What happens if you accidentally draw content in paper space and you meant for that content to be drawn in model space? There is actually a tool that will make that change for you called Change Space, CHSPACE. I'll actually add that to the chat window so everyone has that information. The way this works, if I go to AutoCAD, I have this drawing here. Maybe I accidentally drew content in the wrong space. So this information right here was drawn in paper space, but I wanted it to be drawn in model space. I can simply type change space, select the objects that I want to modify, accept those as my objects to select, and then in the command line it says set the target viewport active and press enter to continue. This will be which viewport do you want to push this information from paper space into model space. I'm clicking this viewport here and hit enter to accept that. And you can see that the information shows up in each of the other viewports automatically. It also gets added to model space because I've shifted it from being in paper space to model space, so it must exist in the model space as well. If I click on each viewport, one of the aspects I need to modify, although, is the relative paper text height for this piece of text. When pushing the annotative text from paper space to model space, that doesn't necessarily correct that for the right size that you want it to be. I'm actually going to change the paper text height to, I believe it was 0.2, and adjust that. And then I'm going to adjust each scale factor of the views. And what I want to see is that the text in the model space viewport is the same as this scale factor text height. So 0.2 was the correct size. I'm going to adjust each of these other views as well. As I pan around to the correct location, you can see that the line type and the text is adjusting to the appropriate text size and scale factor. 3 inches equals a foot. Pan around to find that text. Again, the line weight or the line type is the same as well. So to demonstrate that again, if I accidentally draw something in paper space over top of where this viewport is located, I don't have to go back to model space and draw that content again. I can simply select that content, type CH space, select the correct viewport, and it pushes that content into model space at whatever scale factor it's drawn in on top of that viewport. So it's seamless being pushed from paper space into the model space viewport. You can see here that that information is a much smaller size on the left than it is on the right because that information was in a zoomed in 1-to-1 scale factor, and over here 1.5 inch equals a foot is much smaller, so it's going to be relative to that size. As I mentioned before, when you are modifying content in viewports for their scale factor, if you do not see changes occur automatically, you will want to utilize the regen option. You need to do that in each viewport separately. or use the Region All option, which will update all viewports at the same time. Or if you forget to regenerate before printing, it will do a regeneration process while printing your content as well. The next thing we'll look at is controlling layers differently in separate viewports allows you to control different options for layers within each viewport individually. Things like the layer states, you can control whether the layers are frozen or thawed individually. Their layer color, line type, line weight, and transparency can all be adjusted within each viewport. So you have a lot of control over modifying how your view looks based on its viewport. If I go to this model here, I'm in this layout space for elevations of this log cabin. All of these viewports are looking into my model space at different parts of this view. So if I zoom in here, each of these elevations are actually turned in 4 different directions, and you can shift and rotate that content to show up orthogonally in the viewports themselves. And something like the roof line with the green color here, even though that's green in model space and all the other views, I can double click into this viewport here, go to the Layer Properties Manager, and find that exact same layer for roof, currently using color 92. Instead of modifying the color element column, which will modify every aspect of AutoCAD individually, all these initial columns for on, off, freeze and thaw, layer lock, color, line type, and line weight, transparency, and plot. Those are all going to affect the entire model of AutoCAD for each of those line layer options. The other columns over here for new VP freeze, VP color, VP line type, and VP line weight, and VP transparency. Those stand for viewport line type, viewport transparency. So that VP stands for viewport. So what that allows you to do, find the layer that I'm looking for, which is roof, and change it under VP color column from color 92 to any other color I want to, such as magenta. Click OK. And if I close the layer dialog box, I can see that the color for the roof layer has now been changed to magenta in that viewport. The other viewport next to it still has the same green color. So it does not affect all viewports, just the one that you're looking at. If I click on the viewport to the right, maybe I want to hide the roof hatch pattern in this view. So I recognize which layer this is set to. It's hatch-roof. So I can go to the layer dialog box, find hatch-roof layer. Under the column for VP freeze, set that layer to be frozen in that viewport only. And it turns that hatch pattern off for that element. Again, only in that viewport and not in any other location of my drawing. It's still on in model space, and it's still on in every other viewport that I've not modified. So you have complete control over modifying each viewport individually, as long as you're double-clicked into the viewport in Layout Paper Space, controlling those viewport layers through there. Other things I can modify are line type. Let's find the roof line again. VP line type, change it to from continuous to any other line type that I choose, such as hidden. Click OK, and you can see that the background where the roof line type changed there automatically. So you have complete control over modifying each view independently. Also transparency of content, especially hatching. will utilize transparency very much. So modifying the transparency from 0 to 100% will adjust the transparency of the content on that layer in that viewport alone. What new VP Freeze does, I believe I have a slide for that. New VP Freeze will enable your layout space when creating new viewports. It will automatically freeze that layer in any new viewports that are created. So you can set that layer to have new VP Freeze turned on or off, and it will display that layer on or off in any new viewports that are created. It will not affect any existing viewports, however. You'll still have to go in and manually adjust the VP Freeze option. But if you are just starting your drawing out and have not created any layout viewports yet, set the new VP Freeze option for any layers that you want to control independently to be on or off in different viewports. Then you can go back in and turn them on manually using VP Freeze and thaw them. The next thing we'll look at is you can control your views for each viewport by modifying what's called in-canvas control options. If you notice, when you click into any viewport, in the upper left corner of the view are a number of different icons. You may have noticed them but not known what they did, or you might not even seen them before. Let's take a look at those now. If I go to this three-dimensional view in model space, this is an insert of an attachment for a Navisworks file that has been brought into AutoCAD, and you can actually control what that content looks like in each view separately. So I have 4 different viewports laid out here. Double click into one, in the upper left corner I have some icons here. So I can control this viewport by turning on or off the view cube, turning on the steering wheel, using this plus symbol, turning on or off the navigation bar, and modifying any of those elements that way. I can also use the view type drop-down list and modify the view to be a top-down view, say a left side view, isometric view, and isometric views in different orientations. So if I click all 4 of these viewports and change them to different isometric orientations, I can see all 4 isometric views of each of these viewports. Zoom in to each viewport separately, and you can isolate individual elements and be able to see them in multiple orientations. Again, typically AutoCAD is used for 2-dimensional content, but if you are utilizing 3-dimensional content in your view, you can view each of these elements through your viewports, and you don't have to rotate the objects in model space. The viewport can control that visual modification for you. Again, you have the option to modify top, bottom, left, right, front, and back isometric views for southwest, southeast, northeast, and northwest. And you can also create custom views within the View Manager. You can create new views from the current view in model space, layout, and other preset view options. For instance, if I go to the model space, select a top-down view and zoom into a specific area, of this office. Go to the View tab, View Manager, click New, and it'll ask you to name this view. I'll call it Office. View type is a still style, and I want it to be a defined window that I highlight myself. So I'm going to draw a window around this office area and hit enter to accept that. Goes back to this view. This is a new view named Office. Click OK and click Close. Now I can go back to my layout space. In the drop-down list here, I have an option for new custom view model options, and I'll choose office. So it zooms in directly to that office area that I highlighted in my floor plan view. Using this method, you can also save different locations in your model, and you can go back to them at any time or locate them when printing in different viewports to allow your viewport to automatically zoom into that area more efficiently. So that way you don't get lost in any large building that has a number of different spaces that you're going to want to identify when you're printing your document. So you can save those views for later and bring them back at any time. As well, under the in-canvas controls, you have the view options. You also have different visual style options. If you weren't using three-dimensional content, you can turn on or off wireframe, conceptual, hidden line, realistic view, shaded with edges, shades of gray, sketchy lines, wireframe, and X-ray style. Unless you're using three-dimensional content, these display styles will not really apply to you. But if you are using three-dimensional content, these visual styles will greatly help when printing your content and displaying them in different style methods. In that case, you can have a view for a single three-dimensional object in multiple viewports showing in different orientations. Each orientation will be modified based on the model space, so a single model can identify multiple viewports with different directions of the same content, and you don't even have to modify the viewports when printing. The sheet layout information will do that information for you. And as a reminder, when creating different sheets for printing, you'll create those sheets as a new layout. If a layout does not exist, you can click the plus symbol in the layout space. This will create a new blank layout, typically with a single viewport that you can utilize or replace. You can also select an existing layout, right-click on that layout, and use the option for move or copy. And you can duplicate that layout by creating a copy of it. That way you'll have the same title block information, and you can remove the viewports at that point to be replaced later with other information. Once you're in the layout space, there's a new tab created called Layout. You'll create new viewport areas. Under rectangular drop-down list, choose rectangle. Create a rectangle area of your entire space that is typically zoomed to 100%. Zoom into that area, and you can choose the scale factor that you want to, again, from the scale factor list of default scales. Let's see, that's what it looks like at 1/4 inch. I think that looks fine. Then you can double click outside of the viewport to put yourself back into paper space. Again, you want to make sure that you lock the model information in the paper space view for the viewport. By selecting the viewport, you can modify its properties to say display locked equals yes, or you can right click on the viewport itself, go to display lock, and change that to yes additionally. That means that when you double click into the viewport now and zoom in and out, it does not change the scale factor of the view. By zooming in and out of the viewport, it will just zoom in and out of the whole paper space area. Then once I have the viewport deactivated, I can change the view title to be something like first floor plan, and the scale factor is already 1/4 inch equals a foot, so I'll leave it as that. And that becomes a new sheet in your project. And remember, viewports are windows into your model space area, so anything that you change in your model space will affect the viewports. And if you are using the viewports themselves and you double click your viewport, you can modify content in your model space as if you were actually in the model space area. This is a term called tiled model space when you're working directly on your floor plan through, or on your model space through the viewport. So if I double click on this viewport area and I draw a line right through that floor plan here, and I go back to model space, I'm going to see that line drawn through that floor plan and model space as well. I've modified something that's going to affect every view. And that is going to conclude our presentation and demonstration portion of today's course. If you're interested in future events, such as this type of webinars or classes or courses, feel free to review our content at these different websites that I'll put in the chat window. As always, you can contact the Imaginate services and they will be happy to answer any questions that you may have for any of the courses that we have available, the events that we have that you can sign up for, and any of the classes that you want to take part in. I would like to thank everyone for your time and attention today, and as the time we have left allows, I will take some question and answers if you have any of those. You can type that in the chat window or the questions area. See a couple of here. Let me look at that. I get this question a lot. I apologize that the webinars for this session are not available to public distribution. It's only for the live presentation that you viewed already, and we do not hand out any of the slide content. I apologize for that, and I get that question each time. It's just our policy, and I do apologize for that. See a couple of questions, how to get out of paper space when you're in a viewport. I believe I covered that, but if I did not, again, double click into a viewport and you're actively in that viewport area. You can only see that your cursor is in that viewport, and when you hover over another area, it's another type of cursor, so you still are active in that viewport. You can right click at that point. Okay. You can double click outside of the viewport area into the paper space, or you can double click into the paper space area to activate that. But I've seen this happen a lot as well. What if you are zoomed in so far that you're double clicked into the paper space area and you cannot, or the model space viewport, and you cannot access the paper space at that point? There is a command that you can type, just PS for paper space, and then zoom out and it takes you back to paper space. So I've had that happen quite often. So if you accidentally put yourself into a situation where you can't deactivate the tiled model space, type PS for paper space and it puts you back in the paper space area. Hopefully that answers your question. I think someone also asked a question for using the layer manager to save layer states in viewports. Just to have a complete answer, let me check that. I don't believe that is true, but let me make sure. So I have the layer states here set for, I'll just create a new one called magenta roof, since I know that one changed. Then I'll edit that line style, and the only options in here are the main layer information. So as you can see, the viewport information is not even stored here except for the new VP freeze. So that would be a no to the question of, does the layer state manager control the VP layer options? It does not, because it is not included in this list, even though I'm double clicked into the viewport itself. Hopefully that answers your question. How do you create a title block sheet for Paperspace? If you already have a title block created as a block, which is why it's called title block, because it's a block typically, I'll select this block here for that title block, and I'll identify that this printed area is an architectural expanded D size 36 by 24 inch size. That is important when you are going to print your content, to know what size of the sheet you're printing on. So I'm going to first select the title block, use the Control-C to copy. I'm going to use the plus symbol to create a new layout. Click on that layout, and I can see it created a viewport, and it's actually some random background size where that white area exists. If I paste that title block at 0, 0 and zoom out, I can see that the title block is much larger than the current viewport area. When you go to create your page setup for this layout, you'll go through the process of setting up the printer information, the paper size, Arch D, I think that was. Do a preview just to make sure it looks right. Make that centered. And there's an option in the plot dialog box that says apply to layout. If I just select apply to layout and hit cancel, what I've done is I've set the paper size correctly, and apply to layout is going to expand the white area behind the title block and expand it to be full screen around the title block. That is how you get the paper area, that is the white background, to show up correctly around your entire title block size based on setting the page setup for the view. And then at that point, you can create a new viewport for as many locations as you wish. Can you match the viewport information for multiple viewports with the same layer information? You cannot really. What I would suggest is, if you are going to create multiple copies of a viewport or multiple locations of a viewport with different locations of your model space with the same viewport layer information, I would suggest that you copy that viewport multiple times, which will store that modified information, and then you can change the location the viewport is looking at. This is not the best example because all of these other views are going to be rotated, but as you can see, the roof layer is still magenta colored in each portion of the viewport that I select. And if you're interested in how you get the viewports to be rotated when they're not rotated in model space, you simply select the viewport itself and then rotate it manually in the paper space area to the correct orientation. It will rotate to that orientation regardless of what model space shows it as. VP settings using match properties is someone's question. Let me check that. I don't think that'll occur, but let me make sure. So use match properties on this viewport for that roof. Go down to this viewport and select the same roof line, and it does not make that change. And the reason for that is because under the settings for match properties, the only options are the main styles for color, and actually the information is still always by layer. So in this view, the only thing I can modify is that this line type color is controlled by layer. This line type color is still controlled by layer. It's just controlled by layer via viewport color. So it's a little confusing, but it doesn't change the information using match properties in that regard. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, that's another option. So match properties of a viewport to another viewport. Let's try that. Match properties of this viewport to that viewport. Hey, look at that. Well, I learn something new every day. I just have not tried that before. So as you can see, that function actually did work. So that would be a really good way to match layer state information for the viewports. Of course, it is an all or nothing environment, so you have to make sure that you want all of the changes for that viewport to be set. That would probably include the scale factor of the view. So let me verify that as well. If I change the scale factor of the view to something different and match properties, it will match the scale factor of the content as well. So anything that you see in this properties window will be modified via match properties, as well as apparently all of the layer property information. So I appreciate the person that asked that. I'm glad that we were able to talk about it completely. Thank you. Seems as if I've covered many of these questions, just trying to go through them again. I apologize if I didn't answer any of your specific questions to your desire. We have a free webinar each month that I mentioned, and you can look on that schedule of events for the upcoming topics. They'll be taught in different software packages, Revit, AutoCAD, Fusion, Advanced Steel, all sorts of different types of software packages. Again, myself and my other colleagues are the instructors and the teachers of those webinars. So we bring our knowledge from the field and our courses into that environment. So feel free to look at that website and sign up as often as you wish. They are free to the public. I want to thank everyone again for your time and attention during this webinar session. And I hope that you would enjoy joining us back again next time we have another session. And until then, I wish you the best of your AutoCAD experience, a great rest of your day, and a good continued 5 minutes of your lunchtime. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.